Hello, Frank.
Hey, Matt, how's it going? Oh, God, that's the best opening yet, bar none.
It is day 4, number 203 with the man Frank Scalish. It's a recorded show.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah,
Oh, man.
two brain dead hosts.
Last week's show on Hard Spots, I think, was enlightening, educational, entertaining, engaging. We utilized the Deep Dive app along with some topographical mapping
Yeah, it was a good show.
to identify how to find, locate fish, hard spots, whether it's a natural lake or reservoir. If you have not watched 202, I'd recommend going back and watching that. One of the first real deep dives that we've gone into in recent shows on day 4, but also I learned a lot from it. I actually requested that show last week, Frank. I said
Yes.
I would like you to teach me how to find hard spots.
Yes, you did, and I was happy to oblige.
Yeah, it was a good show if you haven't had that. Also, a little it's not all sunshine and unicorn in Frank Scalish's world. We also talked about the new release of the Mobster swim jigs in some unique natural colors.
Yeah, but let's let's just preface this by saying there's still sizes available.
Oh yeah, but very cool colors on that for the swim jigs. So check those out. Here, I'll pull them up.
Yeah, they're really cool. It's the Ghost Bone series. I had mentioned my favorite colors and what weights I really like to throw. And so some of those
we think there may be a chance, as of this recording, that the day 4 listeners went and cleaned them out before Frank was able to get his hands on anymore.
I still pissed, dude. But that's
Frank
okay.
He goes, "What the hell?"
That's okay.
You gotta order a. They should just send you them and
show.
everything, but you gotta order them before you talk about them, because, like I said, I've been in the boat with you. I've seen your tackle and everything. What you talk about on the show is legitimately what you throw in real life.
I know. It's so funny too, because I started doing the locker rooms again.
Yep.
And I've had a bunch, and the guys are great. In fact, I even learn a few things here and there too from it. So it's been really fun. And I was going with the other day, I was doing one, and I'm saying all these lures that I use, and the kid looked at me. He was a younger kid. He looked at me and he goes, "Dude, you still throw that?" I'm like, "Yes, I still throw those, man. Are you crazy?" I said, "They still work. They still catch fish, man."
I fish around Oklahoma and stuff. Like, I'm 40 now, and if you jump in the boat with like a 25, 26-year-old guy, and you forget that there's like 15 years there, right?
Oh yeah.
So like I remember like when I would get in the boat with Mark and he would be throwing stuff. This was back in like 2007, 8, 9, that type of thing. You'd be like,
so he was throwing.
He was throwing stuff from like the 90s. Right. Mid 90s. So I'm throwing stuff like, this used to crush him in Oklahoma. And I've gotten in the boat and guys like, what the hell is that? I'm like, dude, this is like an Oklahoma staple. And they're like, yeah, maybe before I was born.
Well, it's true.
And like they'd never heard of, stuff that hadn't been made or anything like that. It's crazy just how cyclical everything is.
Oh yeah, it's unbelievable. But
the only thing that stands the test of time are Normans and Booyahs and Pradco baits. But in all honesty, they do, like the DD22s, the Rogues, that type of stuff. It's crazy how that stuff has just stuck around for decades and decades and decades. And obviously, upgraded, you go through all the iterations of them and stuff. But as a whole,
right. And the cool thing about it is, like, especially with Norman, because not to belabor a point, but when I was growing up, you could literally buy them in any gas station.
Really? You could go in and like buy a D22.
Yeah, 100%. I'd go see my buddy Troy in North Carolina, and they'd have them in convenience stores on the shelf
Wow.
in a convenience store. And now you can't. The only place you could hardly find them is Fisherman Central and and lure net. I mean, they're hard to find now. They're not as prevalent, but you could always
Hmm.
get them on lure net. But yeah, it's funny because as techniques change, different things become sexy. Like some of the stuff they're making today with all the legs and tentacles and crap like that, to represent giant versions of zooplankton. Really, is what those like the dice and everything, all
Yeah.
that stuff. It's just a big
I'll
giant
be
version
so interested in seeing where that
goes.
goes. Like,
Yeah,
is that something that in 5-6 years you'll look back on and be like, remember when we were all throwing dice with stuff or is that going to be like a new thing that like becomes part of the arsenal, like a Senko, like a Sluggo style thing? Or
yeah.
I'll be interested to see if that's a trend, a fad, or something that still has not caught on the mainstream, but will become, you'll jump in anybody's boat and be like, hey man, let me borrow a dice. Let me borrow whatever
Whatever. Yeah,
style of bait that is. And everybody just like they've got, just like you've got spine craws and dingers in the boat, you'll have your fuzzy chunker or whatever it's
yeah.
called.
Something with tentacles.
Yeah, fuzzy chunker.
My
That's
octopi
was
balls.
my nickname back in high school. All right,
Oh
so
my
it's the
god.
end of May. It is a recorded show. I'm down in Mexico currently right now, but it is the end of May. And one thing that is synonymous with this time of the year
Aside
is,
from the rain.
yeah, post spawn. A lot of fish are out in summer patterns. We've got a shad spawn going on in a lot of part of the country. It's past that some, but there's one element that, particularly in the last couple of years, has been particularly relevant, and that
Yeah,
is wind.
the wind.
And that is what today's show is about.
Yeah, so the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to dispel a myth because I hear this all the time and it absolutely annoys me. Um Bait fish do not get blown around because of the wind. I'm
You
just
heard it here first.
I'm just telling you, they don't. Um, when I hear people say the bait fish were all blown in the back corner, no, they were not. The plankton was the plankton was blown back there, and the bait fish.
How did you end up in the slammer with a misdemeanor assault charge, Frank? This asshole at the ramp was saying that the bait fish were getting blown around. I had to teach him a lesson.
Yeah, exactly. So the what the wind does, the wind moves the plankton, and the bait fish feed on the plankton. So the
Okay.
bait fish follow the plankton, which is where the wind is pushing it. And then, of course, the bass eat the bait. So the bass are following the bait. So let's just be honest. That's how it goes. Okay. No fish is getting blown around by the wind unless it's sucked up in a tornado. All right.
Which is very often in Oklahoma. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. So, dude, you want to? Okay. So let me tell you something. So I used to live on Lake Erie, really super close to downtown Cleveland. And one winter, okay, beginning of winter, so all the shad would migrate to this hot water discharge that's no longer there, but they would migrate to this by the billions. And we had a massive storm come in with a giant northeastern, and it was literally smashing the waves onto the freeway because the freeway literally almost touches the lake here. Massive waves blowing on the freeway. There was 14-inch gizzard shad all over the freeway
Wow.
because
Yeah.
they were all piled in there from the
Yeah.
warm
Because they
water.
got blown up. They got blown in there from the wind.
Yeah, they got blown in there from the wind. So the giant waves were crashing on the rocks, throwing all these shad on the dude.
But
It
they
was
were
like,
there because the zooplankton had gotten pushed into the rocks and the shad were like feeding frenzy. And then things got out of control and they ended up on the interstate.
right, 100%.
Dude,
And
that's freaking wild.
dude, it was like an ice skating rink of shad guts. There were thousands of them, thousands and thousands. Anyway, we digress. But and so anyway, so something else happened to me. That was the most wildest thing ever. So I literally lived 200 yards from the lake. All right. And I was cutting my grass and something fell from the sky and almost hit me. I didn't think anything of it because I saw it out of the corner of my eye. I thought it might have been a leaf from a tree, an acorn, who the hell knows what it was, right? Didn't pay attention. Then another one, and then one hit the lawnmower, and they were 2-inch shad. Listen to this. They were 2-inch shad, and it was like raining shad on my front lawn. I looked up in the sky, and there were hundreds of seagulls flying around me. Well, they were getting all the shad, okay, and then they were fighting for the bait fish in the air with each other, and they were dropping them, and they were falling all over my yard. It was wild. It was absolutely wild. Anyway,
Yeah, that's interesting. The house you're in now?
no,
No,
I
different house.
used to live right on the lake.
Okay. Huh.
Anyway, it's a cool story.
That's how fish get in different lakes, though, too, right? You know, fish where lakes where fish have never been stocked. All of a sudden, you know, they drain them, and it's like, holy cow, you got bass and bluegill and crappie and all sorts of stuff in there, and that's one of the main ways that happens.
Yeah, they travel via bird.
That's wild.
Via bird.
Wind. Okay, it's all windy around a lot of the country here, so we're going to talk about catching fish in the wind.
Right. So we dispelled the myth. So that myth is gone. All right. No fish is getting blown anywhere by any wind. All right. So that's that. The other thing is that the wind can be to your advantage almost any time of the season. And I will say probably with the exception of the spawn, the actual spawn, because then you can't see the beds, or certain times in the winter. The heavy winds kind of wreck things a little bit certain times in the winter. Other than that, generally speaking, anytime you fish the wind, you're putting yourself at a distinct advantage. You know, so the coolest thing is that fishing wind patterns is pretty easy because generally you're using moving baits, crankbaits, spinner baits, you know, chatterbaits, even topwaters, depending on how much wind you have. So it's pretty cool. I'm going to show you some examples of, I want to show you an example first of something that occurs that I don't think a lot of anglers think about when they fish the wind. This is very important to understand. So if I'm on the Deep Dive app and I have a wind chart pulled up, okay. So if I zoom in on the chart and I go to this section right here, you could see that all these highlighted areas are getting pretty much direct wind.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see the bright spot on it?
Yep.
It's pretty much direct wind. Okay. But there's something that occurs that I don't think a lot of people know about or understand. And I'm going to call it, they're going to be called blow-throughs. So the best thing you could do is it acts like a funnel. All right. And basically what happens is it's called a blow-through. So what you see here is you see how the wind is blowing between the island and this mainland right there. Mm-hmm. All right. That is a blow-through. That's a funnel. The current actually speeds up through these areas. And so where we're going to fish, we're going to say, okay, this is, where we're going to fish, we're going to say, okay, this is direct hit from the wind. All right. So that's a high percentage area. Then we have another area here, and I'm going to draw this on the land. That's not a direct hit from the wind, but because you have the current running through this area here, all right, this becomes a very high potential spot right here.
Almost like a current break.
It's like a current seam. So
Oh.
what you have now is you have a heavier current go, because as it funnels between the island and the point, your current speeds up in that area. So what you have now is you have a current seam where actively feeding fish will use that current. Now, here's the cool thing. The inactive fish, all right, the ones that you could still catch, but they're not aggressively feeding, are going to be in this area right here, because now this becomes the eddy. Because if you notice, we're going to have the current's going to be pushing over. Let me, I got to do this just so we could see now. So if you notice, the current's going to be pushing through here, right? So
Mm-hmm.
as the current hits here, you're going to start to get an eddy developing in this area right here. And because this washes by here, you're going to have the reverse eddy going. So now your neutral fish will hang here because they don't have to fight the current.
And that's just situational because of the direction that the wind's blowing, Frank.
Correct. That's why the deep dive app works in this situation, because if I wanted to, let's say I was targeting blow throughs, let's say blow throughs is what the deal was. So I could look on the map and I can zoom out on it because you see the arrows pointing the wind directions, right?
Yep.
So now I can go through there and find all certain types of blow throughs, like right here. Here's another one where you have the wind pushing through here. So you could find that. Now this lake, I just randomly picked
Okay,
the
so
lake.
change the wind to where it's going down. So right above where you drew that white line, you see those two islands that are pressed together that at this time with this wind is exceptionally calm in there.
Right. So
See
now
if you
here,
can find a way. I don't know. We might get lucky here if there is a way that nope, there's never a direction. Well, there might
well,
be a
no,
direction.
there is, but look at how intense. The red is very intense. Look at how
Yep.
intense the wind is there at was 1203. Okay, very intense. These opposing banks over here and
Mm-hmm.
here, they're getting smashed with the wind.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So this island here gives you some protection for here, so your wave action might not be that big in this area here. Your wave action might not be that big, but those red banks are getting smashed. Now, if I do this, watch this. I'm going to see what the wind's going to do later. Okay, so here we've got a perfect scenario to fish blow throughs. All right. Later on in the day, the wind shifts. This blow through here becomes not a player now because it's got no wind on it. So now it's not a player. So you could look at your patterns throughout your lake. You could look at your patterns throughout the lake and look at the different wind changes to help you figure
And you
stuff
don't need
out.
the deep dive app for this. It's just exceptionally handy. Otherwise, you need to understand which direction the wind's going and then look at your map and then take a guess on where exactly it is.
Correct. 100%. That's blow throughs
Oh,
is
that
some
blow through. Look at that blow through before under that change of wind. It's dead calm in there now on the
right.
top of the screen right there.
Right. So this one here, let me move it so we could see it. So the one that was active and beautiful before in
That was the
here
calmest part on the lake.
is now flat calm. And so if you, let's say you found that in practice and the wind was blowing the right way, which was 1205, right there, and the wind was blowing the right way, all of a sudden later on in the day, it's wrong for
Mm-hmm.
you. You know what I mean? So that pattern would have changed. Now, will the fish move? Probably not, but they'll become very less aggressive. and so it makes them harder to catch. So at any rate, so this is part of the beauty of that. So anyway, so let's talk about fishing in the wind because since we need a wind show, we're going to talk about it. All right. So
It's so eloquent.
yeah, well, what are you going to do, man?
Let's talk about fishing in the wind. Since we need a wind show, we're gonna talk about it.
Yeah. So
Oh,
anyhow,
we make
so
it a full hour here, folks. I think
yeah, we may
we'll
not
give
get there. We may not get
free
there.
free
Um,
booyah for everybody if we make it an hour.
yeah, no kidding. Anyhow, so on inland lakes, don't be afraid of the wind because it's going to offer you aggressive fishing. Generally speaking, when I come to the windy banks and I'm fishing the windy banks, I'm pretty much on moving baits.
Okay.
Because the bass are predicated on the bait fish. The bait fish are there, as we discussed earlier, because of the plankton. I don't see a reason to ever have to slow down when you're fishing a wind pattern. And there are a lot of lakes that are 100% wind driven lakes. Um, Lake Norman's for one, Old Hickory, Table Rock, just to name a few. There are lakes that the wind can absolutely benefit you, and you could run just wind related stuff. Baits are real simple. I'm throwing crank, some form of a crankbait, spinner bait. Um, Something I don't hear about anymore on a lot of this, like on a lot of the spotted bass lakes, like Lanier and stuff. Spinner baiting long, windy points for gigantic spotted bass. I don't hear a lot of people talking about this anymore, and it still works, which I can't. I don't understand. I think we talked earlier about lures that fall out of favor because it's not sexy anymore or whatever. Um, I think people that are putting the spinnerbait down, um, they're crazy because in certain situations you almost can't beat it. Spotted bass lakes, even smallmouth fisheries, um, burning a spinnerbait on windy points and stuff like that, you can't beat it. I mean, it's just you're appealing to a larger predator. You're catching a much bigger bass by doing it, and it's a pattern that's fun to fish because you're constantly on the run. You're constantly running from one spot to the other spot to the other spot. It's not a lazy man's pattern for sure, because you have to work the wind and you have to pay attention because on some lakes what the wind is blowing like somewhere else may not be happening on another lake. Here, let me see if I could.
Like just a basic spinner bait like that, Frank. Like half ounce double willow leaf, chartreuse and white,
Yes,
shad looking, like you don't have to get absolutely crazy with it.
right. Like if you're fishing points and stuff, I'm usually honking a double willow
Okay.
because I could reel it in a little quicker. It'll stay a little lower in the water column. And generally speaking, I'm a half ounce or 3/4 ounce when I'm fishing spinner baits on windblown points
Okay.
because I want to be able to smoke that thing back to the boat, but I don't want it plopping out of the water. I want to keep it lower in the water column. Burning spinner baits for smallmouth, same thing. If I'm burning it in and that bait keeps ticking the top of the water, then two things: my blades are too big, or I'm not heavy enough on the spinnerbait head. So just things to keep in mind.
So
So
like a
I
covert like that in the 3/4 ounce.
Yeah, 100%, 100%.
Beautiful.
And so
Simple as
that's
it gets.
right. It's really easy. And generally speaking, I'm using a shad colored skirt in that situation because they are absolutely predicated on bait fish. Cranking, you could get away certain times of the year cranking if you're fishing like rock wind blown riprap. Um, you could get away with crawdad colored baits on the riprap. Um, but as a rule of thumb, I'm still generally throwing a shad type of bait.
Okay. That's pretty simple.
Hmm. So another trick with the wind, I pulled up Old Hickory since I mentioned it, and we just happen to have it right. So not all banks are created equal. So let's cover that. What I'm looking for when I'm fishing windy banks is irregularity. I want lots of irregularity. So I picked this spot because it has all these little pockets and points that run through here. It's very irregular. That's going to give me a lot of structure, which is going to position the fish. So that's why I chose that.
As opposed to just a channel swing bank where the wind is just hammering into it and there is absolutely nothing
Yeah,
else, just
like
as opposed to that.
right, like right here.
Yeah.
Can there be fish on here? Yes, there can be, depending on what the contour lines are doing beneath the water.
Yeah.
There can be. But as a rule of thumb, this is probably where it's going to start getting good. And then this is probably where it's going to end getting good.
Yeah, I see what you're saying though. All those little areas, especially where
Right.
the red is, which is highlighted in the deep dive, which shows that's where the strongest wind is. It's going to
Correct.
concentrate the fish. It's going to give you target angles. It's going to give them ambush points. You're going to have little 30, 40-yard stretches that are getting hit that is
Right.
going to push those fish into that area because that's where the plankton are getting pushed into, not just randomly down a 2-mile stretch. And then that's going to concentrate the fish. So you have higher percentage casts.
That is correct. You're actually going to have a better opportunity to have more fish hiding in nooks and crannies and stuff, the more irregular the bank is.
Mm-hmm.
Bluff banks, I target the ends of the bluff. Here, I bet you I could find one here.
Headed up the river.
Yeah,
Oh, no.
there's bluffy banks here. Okay, so bluff banks, all right. So here's what I'm going to target on bluff banks. I'm going to look for the bluff ends.
Okay.
That's your high percentage spot. You can catch them on the straight stretch, but generally speaking, your high percentage stuff is going to be all the bluff ends. It's pretty simple, pretty self-explanatory. Now because we serpentine the lake, this area is not getting a ton of wind, but you can see the highlighted areas it's still getting wind.
Mm-hmm.
Probably a better section of the lake would be to go back to here and go over here. This will be this is good.
Yep.
Okay, so here what we have here is we've got, this is actually really good actually. So what we have here is we have the bluff. We have right here we've got a divot, a cave in, bluff end. We've got one right here. We've got one here. We've got one here. So this gives you opportunities. And if you're honking and you're fishing fast, you could literally just fish down this, because if there's a cave in that occurred under the water that you don't see on a bluff, and there's a pile of rock, or if there's a shelf on the bluff, Wheeler had that. This one section I fished at Wheeler, it was a pretty vertical bluff, but there was a shelf that came out and dropped off, and the fish were actually on the shelf. So running the spinnerbait parallel or the crankbait parallel was giving me the bites because there was something to hold them there. So you could side image that and figure out in a hurry if the whole bluff is worth fishing or just concentrating on the bluff ends. So that's, fishing the wind is, I don't want to say it's easy, because there's going to be a pattern that develops and you're going to notice it where, like right now, everything I'm showing you is main lake related.
Mm-hmm.
But like if it was a month ago, you'd be doing the same thing in the creek. You'd be doing the same thing over here in the creek, because the fish would be getting ready to go to their spawning areas. So I'm just doing main lake now because most of the spawn stuff is done. We're post spawn to early summer patterns going on now. So that's why I'm pretty much, sticking on the main lake. So you could run the wind seasonally, predicated on what the seasonal pattern is.
You ready for some rapid fire questions about the wind?
Yes, let's do it.
What about wind in vegetation that is above the surface? I have always heard you do not want to fish wind if you're in reeds, if you're in vegetation, because it rubs against the fish, it gets their lateral line, it's harder for them to find it. You want to avoid wind when you are fishing grass. True or false?
Okay, I gotta say false on that. I will tell you bulrushes, emergent vegetation. So your bulrushes, your stuff that grows out of the water
Yep.
and under the water. What the fish are going to do is they're going to find comfort in the holes, that canopy, the holes that the grass makes. They'll find comfort in there. What happens then is you're flipping. Your presentation is precise. You're going to drop it through the grass into the opening where the fish are sitting.
Okay.
Like milfoil, coontail, grass that grows underwater that may reach the top, the wind could be your best pal, because the spinnerbait bite turns on and it goes ballistic. If it's not throwing 3-footers on the grass, top waters are crazy in the wind. So it opens up opportunities. Generally speaking, the wind is going to make the fish more aggressive. So you have that opportunity to fish real. So you have to pay attention to that. Now, it's the same thing with, when you said, I don't think the grass bumping into the fish makes them,
It's old
irritated.
wives' tale.
Yeah, I don't think it makes them irritated, but they're going to seek the best spot in that emergent vegetation, which is going to be closest to the root ball. It's going to be the most stable, and it's going to open up under there. So they're not going to be like plastered like a sandwich in the grass. They're going to have a space around them. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Florida's tricky. Let's talk about Florida for a second. Florida's tricky because the wind will create a sediment ball, and what it is, I think it's like particulate sand matter, real small sand. And when you get that off color water, the bass can't stand that. Picture it like them being in a room filled with smoke, like you being in a room filled with smoke, trying to breathe. It's hard for them to breathe. So in Florida, I've seen instances where if the wind's blowing and the water's clean, you're in the money. If the wind's blowing and the area you're in, the water looks dirty, it's no bueno in Florida. But blow-throughs in Florida, we talked about blow-throughs. Blow-throughs in Florida are different. You'll have spanses of bulrushes, cattails, and grass that's matted on the surface. Backwater, like it happens on the Kissimmee chain a lot. The grass grows out into the lake, but there's open water behind the grass towards shore. And then if the wind's blowing and you've got open pockets of water funneling through the grass and there's an opening in the grass, that's a blow through. Those could be money down south. Blow throughs in grass could be money anywhere. But I've experienced it firsthand in Florida where, I'll be running down the lake, the wind will be honking, and I'll see like where a canal comes out of the backwater. And I'll do a U-turn and go right to the mouth of that. And the bass stack there, the current's coming, everything's working for them. So you have to, when you're fishing wind, pay attention to, what's around you visibly. Because if the wind's really honking and there's a blow through, that's like fishing below a tail race. Obviously much smaller, not as much volume of water, but it's the same principle. The current's there, the bass are going to be there. And because that's a feeding zone.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what you want to look for.
What about wind in Oklahoma? We have a lot of red clay, a lot of dirt. You have visibility less than 6 inches in a lot of lakes anyway. What about wind-blown lakes and blow-throughs on fisheries that are already really muddy?
Yeah, you're fishing shallow. I'm fishing big baits, because of the visibility. Like when I came down to fish with you,
Yep.
and we went to some of the lakes, I'm like, holy crap, this is horrible.
Yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Does
and you're
wind still impact the positioning and the
yeah,
fish in the muddy water as much as it does
yeah,
quote normal water is my question.
yeah, because the wind does the same thing no matter what the watercolor is.
Okay. And you'll still have the plankton and it'll still drive the bait fish that are feeding on those plankton.
100%, 100%.
What about we talked about this last week with hard spots and you mentioned a little bit in Florida, but do you pay more attention to the bottom composition along the bank or what you're fishing when it is really windy? Like, are you more likely, do you want a clean bottom so that there's less turbulence below the surface of the water when there's wind, or is that not?
No, generally speaking, I just want some form of cover and structure.
Okay.
Um, Rock, boulders, stumps. I want some form of cover or structure because the bass can use it as ambush places. If the current's really strong, they got a place they could tuck out of it without traveling, basically. And bass are opportunistic predators, and for the most part, unless they're pelagic chasers, they're ambushers. So they're always going to have something to their advantage for food source.
And then I mentioned the bank and I talked about the hard stuff. Does wind impact if it's gassing? Are you more likely to find a blow through or a bank to fish, or are you still comfortable staying offshore? Because if you're thinking, this is where I'm thinking with this, Frank. If you're going with, hey, the plankton, the whatever, the zooplankton are getting blown around, though that shore, that bank, that bluff end, whatever, provides a stopping point for them, which then allows the bait fish to go, which then it's the circle of life. But if I'm offshore on a hard spot that's hundreds of yards away from anything, how do I know, like, how do I know that my stuff isn't just getting blown around down there? Like, where's the stopping point? I know I see a lot of guys fish offshore when it's windy and have
Oh
caught them
yeah,
offshore, but that does that make sense to you what I'm saying? Like,
it
how
make
do
it
I
make
know that the stuff that was keeping my bait fish there when it wasn't windy isn't 200 yards behind me on the bank now and all these fish aren't on the hard spot anymore?
Okay, so offshore structure when it's windy out, the fish bite like crazy.
Right.
They get very aggressive. So what you have to look for when you're offshore fishing and it's windy is, are the fish suspending or are they still on the cover itself? Because if they're still on the cover itself, then banging bottom with crankbaits, rigs, football jigs, etc., is still going to be appropriate. But if they get up and they suspend off the structure, which the smallmouth have a tendency to do in
Yep.
the wind, they'll if the hump's in 25 feet of water, they're going to stay in 25 feet of water, but they might be 50 yards from that hump. So you have to, and with live scope today, you could find that. You could do a quick zigzag with the scope, and you could see if they're on it or away from it. Generally speaking, when the wind's cracking offshore, you can see some suspending bass around your structure, which is great because they're very aggressive. Slick, flat offshore fishing days, the only advantage that gives you is that the bass could plaster into the bottom, and then you could slowly, meticulously fish for them. But when there's wind on the lake, man, those fish are aggressive and they're biting offshore.
One word that I have not heard that I know you've talked about before that I'd like you to dive into is, when do you look for mud lines that create ambush points for it? And is that more current generated, or can a sustained wind for a number of days create a mud line, which then results in a key ambush point?
Well, wind makes current. All right.
Okay.
There's wind generated current that occurs. Let me see. I can show you right here on the map. So you see on the map, you see the arrows on this bluff corner. They're blowing this way, right?
Yep.
So here, let me make sure that we're going the right way first. Okay, so we're not. But so okay, so what's going to happen is that the dam is over here. All right. And so the current is actually, in this particular instance, going the opposite way. The wind, the current's going towards the dam, the wind's blowing the opposite direction. What this is going to do, it's going to stall it. It stalls the current here. So realistically, this stretch right here is going to have a slowdown of current in it because the wind's going the opposite way. Let me see if the wind's going to change at all here. Oh, nope, 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 nope.
And we got a bad wind week.
Yeah, no, it's not going to change. So, okay, so if the wind was, let's say the wind was blowing exactly the opposite way, it was blowing towards the dam, then the area circled in blue, the current would be screaming through there because the current's going the same way. If the current goes the same way as the wind, it makes it faster. If the current's going the opposite way of the wind, it slows it down. Which is good to know because if the bass are predicated on feeding in heavy current, you could actually find, better current areas with more flow to it to stay on more active bass.
Okay.
Yeah, this wind is literally, I'm going through this. It's literally blowing against the current everywhere.
Yeah, I was trying to find a diagram of that, but that makes sense. I think those are other questions I had in regards to that.
Yeah, but wind fishing, like a lot of people avoid it. I don't avoid it at all because realistically, you're fishing fast. You're fishing fast, and it's a fun way to fish because you're constantly moving. You're constantly on the go. You're covering tons of water, and if you have a pattern that's working, it could be points, it could be bluff ends, it could, whatever the pattern is. You can really have a good day fishing the wind. I mean, really a good day. Generally speaking, it's the hardest part about fishing in the wind for a lot of people is boat control because you always have to be facing into the wind with your boat. I never fish with the wind at my back. Never. I can't stand it. You have no boat control. I can't slow down enough to be meticulous with my casting. You blow by things too quick. So you always want your nose facing into the wind. That'll make your life so much easier fishing wind-blown areas.
Very nice.
Yeah, this is not a hard topic. I think the hardest part of this is for some to commit to fish the wind.
Yeah.
That's where I think the hardest.
And if you're fishing multiple days or if you have a plan in your head, this is a seat of your pants, to use the Iaconelli term, fish the moment type of deal. What
100%.
is good at 10 o'clock in the morning may not be good at 2, and what you're smashing them on at 2, you might not get a bite on at 10.
Right. So if you are fishing the wind patterns, you have to pay attention to what the wind's going to do all day because different sections will go off. I've experienced that on Norman a ton, where my buddy Troy and I would be running wind pattern and on one section of the lake, and you go to the other section of the lake and it's dead. So you got to really pay attention because, especially in lakes like the one that I have up on the deep dive app, that's real serpentine. Things change. You notice if this lake is farther up the river you go, the less the wind is an impact on it because it gets narrow, tight, serpentine. Wind is almost non-existent there. There's some, but it's not as good as where the red spots are on the lake.
So I like it.
Yeah, that's kind of it, man. I wish there was more detail, but I don't.
That's good.
But I don't think, I think if you pay attention to the blow throughs, the current direction, wind direction,
Mhm.
and stay on banks that offer opportunity, with a lot of nooks and crannies to them. I think you'll be very successful. Windblown points on spotted bass lakes are so money, it's disgusting. As the point rises, there's more current between the top of the water and the top of the point. And so the bass will use that to their advantage. So do the bait fish, by the way.
I like it. Told you we keep it shorter than an hour. We don't have to give away free lures.
Outstanding. Outstanding.
All right, we got hard spots, we got wind. You can combine the two. You can fish them separately. Two good breakdown shows over the last couple weeks here on BTO.
Excellent.
I think we'll be back live next week, which would be the beginning of June.
Perfect.
June 5th. So
hopefully with a lot of fish stories.
Hopefully with a lot of fish stories. All right, this has been another edition of Day 4 with the man Frank Scalish. We'll talk to everybody later. See ya.